Why would I want to go to the other side of the globe and trade with another country? Well, if you were Honda, if you were the founders of Honda, who originally were told by Toyota that they weren't good enough to be engineers and started their own company, then you might say, well, if we could design a bike so versatile that you could carry soda noodles on it while riding, if we could create a bike like that, and we could go to Germany and find that the average upwardly mobile German went from a bicycle to a bike with a clip-on motor to then a moped and then to a bubble car and then a regular car, that you could actually sneak in this bike in a way for them to climb up their ladder of success, and that was a niche that the German domestic motorcycle manufacturers were not meeting. If you were BMW and you knew that the only way that you could survive as a company was selling luxury cars, but the European market was saturated, then the United States is beckoning, because you can sell a bunch of luxury cars to them in the 1950s and on. So that would be another reason why you would want to trade with the rest of the world. Now, speaking of which, you're all thinking, this is such a great speech this guy is giving, right? So, if I were to pay you to go out and pass out tickets to watch this speech, and you went over to GSR, how many of you would do that for 5 cents an hour? No one? My goodness. Okay, so let's raise the minimum wage. How many of you would do that for $5 an hour? Wow, you guys are some heavyweight players. Okay, $10 an hour. Okay, I've got one taker. Get 2 takers, so we've got a labor market here. And how many of you would do it for $25 an hour? Okay, this is a tough labor market. Wow. Elizabeth Warren would probably say this was evidence we need to raise the minimum wage then. But anyway, $30 an hour? Okay, well, I don't think I can afford that. But the point is, speaking of markets, what do you call the Big Mac in India? The Maharaja Mac. Now, why do they call it that? Well, because it's technically a different product, and they don't make it from beef. They used to make it from lamb. And the idea is the large Hindu population means it's going to be a different product. What do they call the quarter pounder with cheese in Paris? And nobody's seen
Royale with cheese.
There you go. Somebody's seen Pulp Fiction. There's your attribution. We've got it. Anyway, the idea is they don't use the metrics. They use the metric system there. They don't use the English standard system. So it's going to be called something else as well. But the Big Mac is also a great way of understanding currencies. If you take the big price of the Big Mac in the United States and divide that by the price of the Big Mac in China or wherever, you can get an idea of where the real currency is, the implied purchasing power parity. And then if you take the difference between that and the actual exchange rate and then divide it by your quote-unquote implied purchasing power parity, you could get an idea of what the real currency is, if it's undervalued or overvalued. And why would that matter? For that matter, how many of you think that the United States, since I'm the personification of the United States of America, clearly, this is an important question, how many of you think it's really good to have a strong dollar for the United States of America? If you had to choose between a strong dollar and a weak dollar, how many of you would choose strong dollar? Okay, so we've got a few takers. And how many of you would choose weak dollar? And then how many of you just don't care? Right? Okay. Well, you guys might be right, because there's pros and cons to both. But if you want a strong dollar, that's great if you're a tourist. It's also great if you make a lot of goods in another country. If you're Tesla, for example, and you make your Tesla car in China that you're going to sell to the Chinese, then you probably want a strong dollar. But if you're making something here in the United States and you want to sell it abroad, then you want a weak dollar. And ultimately, in order for this country to survive, we have to move from being an import country to an export country at some point. So it means that we want somebody's dollar to be weaker than ours. But in perpetuity, you don't want one or the other anyway. And that would be a really long speech if I started going on about the balance of payments. But, really long speech. That red thing would come up, you guys would go, no, get out of here. But that's all beside the point. So if you have a dollar that doesn't really stretch very far, and you have more money chasing less goods, that's what Milton Friedman said was inflation, right? And I'm here to tell you deflation would probably be like fewer assets fetching smaller and smaller returns. You don't want that either. So how would we get this economy going? How would we supersize this economy, right? Well, you know, in the 1980s, that's when the internet revolution started flowering, right? But it took about a decade before you had this productivity that was skyrocketing. And today, you have technology, you have innovations like, I want to say, the Internet of Things, the aggregation of big data in the hands of small business owners, 3D printers, advanced robotics technology, drone technology, you name it. So whereas the Red Queen's race was once played out on the contours of the Silk Road, today we're living in a three-dimensional chessboard played out on a world of dynamic proportions. So I remember a supervisor who used to say that a wolf runs on its stomach. And he was right. A wolf does run on its stomach. If you're not running hungry, you're not going to be able to run with the pack. But I tell you what, ultimately, it is the head that holds her fangs in place when she catches up with her prey. And a culture of experimentation is just the kind of innovation I think we can all sink our teeth into.